jump a run.
Okay.
All right. Hi guys. We are the systems group that's working with Kids Plus Pediatrics this semester. My name is Zach, and I'm the project manager.
My name is Priya.
I'm Angela.
I'm Kyle.
I'm Vic.
I'm a Darren.
And so what this is our final presentation for the semester. And today I'm going to start off with a recap of the first two phases of the project and kind of give a background on the scope and the background research that we did, including observations at two different clinical sites. We're then going to move into a quality and reimbursement analysis that we did, and that will also go into a patient retention analysis. We did simulations using Arena, which is a simulation software, and we came up with a recommendation for a different way to schedule patients that might increase throughput for you. We're then going to move into process improvement recommendations. We outlined a lot of different observations that we made during the last presentation, and what we've done is we've narrowed it down to fewer recommendations. If you remember, I think we had 19 observations that we made, and we narrowed it down to fewer recommendations. We had 13 process recommendations that we came up with. We separated it into short-term, intermediate, and long-term, and we divided it up into 4 different buckets that we will get into later. And then we're also going to talk about the overall workload impact that all these recommendations will have on Kids Plus in terms of throughput, and then get into the overall improvement in throughput that Kids Plus will have if all of our recommendations are implemented. And so to start, just a background on what the scope of our project was. So at the beginning, we have been focused on productivity. And so increasing throughput at Kids Plus has been the overall goal of the project. And while doing so, we wanted to keep in mind quality measures. So Darren and Priya have done a deep dive into the different quality measures that Kids Plus is using, gone into detail on Bright Futures, Highmark, and HEDIS, and made a big line item sheet that we went over with Dr. Wolf and Dr. Wolin a few weeks ago, and we've done some analysis of that and made recommendations. We also made sure to keep patient experience and staff experience in mind so that we don't make any recommendations that's going to adversely affect those by too much. And then we're also keeping cost in mind so that we're not making recommendations that's going to be too costly and unrealistic for Kids Plus to implement. And throughout the process, so we have been doing observations. These all took place before the last presentation. Again, we did over 70 hours of observations at the 2 different sites, and they were at Squirrel Hill and Pleasant Hills, and this involved mapping all areas of the patient journey, including registration with the front desk, rooming for the MAs, provider interactions, and then charting and ordering of tasks for MAs as well. And so I'm going to go into some historical trends really quickly. Chip from PCC provided us with historical data dating back to 2014 for Kids Plus in terms of patient load. And so we only have data through October for 2017, but every year it follows the same general path, with a spike in October, November, December. And throughout 2017 so far, there have been a little more patients that you guys have seen, but the same general uptick has been seen in September and then getting into October as well. And then just looking at sick visits, the same cycle kind of follows for every year. And if you just look, the 2017 data is the green bar on the right, and it's keeping in line with historical trends. And same thing for well visit, except for a spike that happened in August. And so now Darren is going to talk more about our quality analysis and our methodology behind
So to conduct a quality analysis, we looked at HEDIS and Highmark measures associated with the insurance metrics that KPP is currently being scored on. To note, the HEDIS measures are followed by approximately 90% of insurers, so that does encompass a lot of insurer groups for KPP. So what we did with these identified measures that KPP is being scored on is we broke each measure down by age, how the eligible population is defined for each measure, and we also documented the rate to report, what information needs to be documented for each measure, and then the different ways that that information can be presented within the DHR. Once each measure was detailed, we were able to analyze the information to see if KPP's current process during the visit contained additional steps that were not necessary to meet compliance. And what we found while conducting this analysis was that all the steps that KPP is doing falls within the insurer guidelines for documentation, but at times the documentation itself can be excessive as defined by the insurer guidelines, such as nutrition and physical counseling. KPP's process goes into a very detailed list of questions, but these guidelines just require a general note be made. What we did discover is that KPP's process, the current process that KPP has in place to meet these measures and receive maximum reimbursements are meeting those, are following the guidelines. However, we noticed that appointment compliance and total patient throughput are areas that could be improved to help maximize their reimbursement. In a couple of slides, we'll be describing the patient population breakdown, and Priya will talk further about the impact analysis of increasing patient compliance. But to move on, this is an example of how we line item each quality measure. As you can see, we broke down each measure by the age range that it covers, how the eligible population is defined, the rate to report, the information that needs to be documented as what is the metric note details, and then the metrics column identifies ways in which the information can be detailed in the report, in the detail. A couple columns that are not displayed identify whether the measures are being scored by Highmark or HEDIS, and whether KPP is choosing not to meet those measures, whether they're meeting those measures, or if they're doing processes that exceed the requirements of those measures. So upon review and study of the quality measures and reimbursement process, we identified areas of excessive aspects, such as the documentation of nutrition and physical counseling, as mentioned before. We also noted areas of potential documentation issues where related information may be housed in different areas of the EHR, which has the potential to lead to confusion when insurers are conducting the audit for reimbursement. And lastly, we looked at patient retention and appointment compliance to see to what extent increasing appointment compliance would have an impact on reimbursements for KPP. So with the data that we received from Judy, we ran some analyses. We compared the state of appointment compliance from year 1 and year 2. The data from year 1 is capturing patient visits from November 2015 to November 2016, and year 2 is capturing data from November 2016 to November 2017. On the x-axis of this graph, we have broken down the population by age group as defined by Bright Futures. So on the left side of the dotted line is year 1, with the breakdown of infancy, early childhood, middle childhood, adolescence. In Bright Futures, adolescence is comprised of patients ages 11 to 22, but for the purpose of our analysis, we broke that down into adolescents being 11 to 17 and adults being 18 and above. On the left-hand y-axis, this is the count of the visits, and on the right-hand side is the average reimbursement amount the average amount deposited per visit. And then the green line correlates to the right-hand side the right-hand side detailing how much of the average amount deposited is received per age bracket. As you can see, the KDP has seen approximately the same amount of visits between year 1 and year 2. However, the amount deposited has increased from year 1 to year 2 by approximately $15.5 million, while the number of appointments has had a slight decrease of about 90. Then this is just a table breakdown of the information that we obtain, again broken down by Bright Future's age grouping. In the second column, percentage of age group, this is the percent of the age group that is well and sick. So for year 1, 50% of infants were seen for sick visits and 50% of infants were seen for well visits. So as a whole, we can note that more infants are seen. We can note that infants are seen. There's a higher number of infants seen, and they also have a higher average deposited amount. And for well and sick. And then the next slide is year 2. Again, the information is about the same. KBP sees more sick visits than well, and however, the amount they receive for infants is significantly higher. I'll hand it off to Priya.
Thanks, Amanda. So in order to look at the age individual breakdown to analyze patient retention, we first started by looking at the total number of patients broken down by the different categories, which Darren specified was infancy being under 1, early childhood being 4 to 10, middle childhood being 5, early childhood being 1 to 4, and middle childhood being 5 to 10, and adolescent being 11 to 17. And then we've also broken out 18 and above. As you can see, the infancy and early childhood numbers show that most of the patients in that age range are compliant with their appointments. But as we move on to middle childhood and adolescent, that number drops drastically to the point where 38% of middle childhood patients are comply with their annual well visits, and 41% comply, and only 36% comply for 18 and above. Moving on to sick visit, we could have done the same kind of analysis, but given the fact that there's probably not only going to be one sick visit per year, and to the point where either some patients will not be coming in that year because they don't get sick, or patients will come in multiple times a year, we decided that that same kind of percentage analysis was not going to work. However, we decided that these numbers were still valuable because they showed the extent to which patients might be going to urgent care centers instead of coming to KPP for their sick visits. I'd like to talk about the process for reimbursement so that we can really delve into how important compliance is for this. So when a patient makes a claim at KPP, their name automatically goes into a list that an insurance company can pull their record from. From that, the insurance company will decide which measure that they want to audit at that point in time and choose a certain amount of charts from KPP to review. They will choose either the entire chart or aspects of the chart so that they can thoroughly conduct their audit on the chart. And so whether or not the patient meets that measure or not depends on whether they have gone in for a visit that would capture that measure. So for example, if I was to go in for a sick visit, but I was not having my well visit at the time, and my insurance company wanted to see whether I had gotten my adult BMI index checked, they would not be able to because I had not gone in for my well visit to get that measure checked. and therefore I would go on the denominator and not on the numerator, and it would not go towards KPP reimbursement. And so this has a substantial amount of importance for reimbursement. As you can see, the compliance has a trend of decreasing from infancy all the way over to 18 and above. So there is approximately a 41% chance that KPP would get reimbursed for a measure that was for adolescents. As you can see on the top side of this, the number of quality measures per age category goes up. So it significantly impacts whether or not KPP will be receiving their reimbursement. This further delves into the probability for reimbursement because the compliance is the main factor of whether or not they will be getting reimbursed. As you can see by the example, the probability that the insurance will identify the measure will be 1 because they will want to do chart audits for every single measure that they are paying for, as well as the fact that probably most charts will get pulled, so it centers around patient compliance. The good news in this is that if KPP was to increase their appointment compliance for each age range, then the amount of money that KPP will receive in turn will go up substantially. At the top part of this graph, you can see the base at what the current state is at 0%. As you increase in increments of 5%, the amount goes up substantially. And the range denotes the maximum minus the minimum of those payments, so you can see which ones have the most impact. While the range shows that infancy would have the most significant impact on the financials for KPP, the amount of patients that KPP already has that are infants is very high for their appointment compliance. So it would be more likely that the appointment compliance would increase at the right hand of this graph for the adolescents and 18 and above.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process improvement recommendations, in specific, the simulations that we did. So we modeled KPP in Arena simulation software, and it's nice because this way when you have the model in there, you can change the processes and see how the change can affect your wait times without actually having to do it in KPP. So we focused mostly on one MA and one provider activity and how the workflow goes throughout an entire day. And we repeated that day for 500 times. So this is a zoomed out view of what it looks like, but I'm going to go in and talk about each part. So this is the scheduled arrival. It kind of looks really confusing, but mostly it reads in the arrival time. Arena is mostly made for processes where they don't have a known arrival time, but in KPP, patients come in during their scheduled appointment time, so we do know when they're usually going to come. We factored in a little bit of randomness though, because some patients arrive earlier, and we noticed that if an MA was free and they arrived early, then the MA will take them before their scheduled appointment time. So we wanted to put that in there as well. And in our observations, we noticed that on average, patients come in 6 minutes early, and there's a standard deviation of 4.3, so we put that bit of randomness in there as well. And then that goes into the MA activity. Once they arrive, they go into the MA queue, and then they wait for the MA. And once the MA is free, there are 4 types of MA activity that can occur, which is the sick rooming, the well rooming, the sick performing tasks, and the well performing task. And once that is done, the well or sick patient then goes into a decision diamond where if they need to go see a provider, they then proceed into the provider activity portion. All the individual activities are modeled under a normal distribution using the mean and standard deviation that we collected during our observations during the second phase. And if the well or sick patient needs to see a provider, they then go into the provider queue, and there are two types of visits that they can have, either the sick visit or the well visit. And once that is over, they go into a decision diamond where some patients are then seen again by the MA. So they then go down this way and they go back to the MA queue. If not, they check out and that's the end of their appointment. And so we, through our observations, figured out that around 48.5% of well visits end up going back to the MA, and around 25% of sick visits go back to go see the MA again. So what we wanted to see is how, if we change the schedules around, how that would affect wait time and throughput. So all our schedules start at 8 o'clock and are scheduled back to back. And we have 29 schedules for each types of schedule. All have a 1 hour and 10-minute lunch, and the simulation is replicated 500 times. So the first schedule that we have is a normal schedule where sick and well visits are randomly interspersed. If you have a sick visit, there usually is 10 minutes between the next appointment, and if it's a well appointment, there's 20 minutes between until the next appointment. We also experimented with a block schedule where all the well visits happen first and then all the sick visits happen afterwards. Similarly, we did that with the 12-minute sick block schedule as well, where instead of the sick being just 10 minutes long, we did it with 12 minutes. And the same with the 15-minute sick block. And then for the 15-minute sick, we had just the sick visit being 15 minutes long, and it's interspersed randomly with the well visits as well. And here are the results that we found. So for a normal schedule, the sick average wait time is around 43.78 minutes, and the well average wait time is 46.34, and the sick total time is around 71.94 minutes, and the well total time is 84.68. This is not what we've seen in your current KPP process, but this is when the schedule is maxed out, and it's different at Kids Plus because you guys have other types of visits interspersed as well, and it's not usually scheduled back to back. We also looked at the block schedule. On the block schedule, we saw that the sick average wait time went up by a lot, but the well average wait time went down to 18.77 minutes. And from here, we hypothesized that this is because the sick average wait time is only, between sick appointments, it's only 10 minutes long, but the provider activity time is around 16 minutes, and the provider activity time is where the bottleneck occurs. And so that's why we decided to come up with a 12-minute sick block schedule to see how that would affect the sick average wait time, and as you can tell, it goes down by around like 20 minutes, and then we did that again with a 15-minute sick block schedule, and that goes down again to around 19.64. And at this point, we thought about doing a 15-minute sick schedule and just interspersing it, and we found that there really wasn't any difference between the two. Then we're going to look at some queue time. So the MA wait time is how long a patient waits for an MA, and the provider wait time is how long a patient waits for a provider. And the MA number waiting is, on average, how many patients are waiting for the MA, and the provider number waiting is the same, or how many patients on average are waiting for a provider. So as you can tell, as the sick schedule or sick appointment time increases, the MA waiting time, provider waiting time, and the queue length decreases. And so by increasing the 15 sick visits from 15 minutes, we obviously have increased the entire time it takes for a provider and MA to finish their time. But if you look, the normal schedule starts at 8 o'clock, and the scheduled end time is supposed to be 3:50. But for a normal schedule, that doesn't happen until the average simulation end time, which is when the last patient actually leaves, is around 5:06 because of all the wait times that accumulate. For a block schedule, that's around 5:46. And for 15 minutes, even though the scheduled end time is longer, as you can tell for the 15-minute walk schedule and the 15-minute sick, the time between the scheduled end time and the actual average simulation end time is not as long. And so for our final recommendation, we think that time between scheduled appointments should equal to total provider activity time, and we know that increases the time for sick appointments, and that doesn't really increase throughput, but it decreases wait time for patients, and it also decreases stress for providers. And we found that even though sick visits increased to 15 minutes, the time the last patient left was only 45 minutes later than the scheduled normal appointment that we were using. Now I'm going to pass it to Kyle to talk about more specific activity improvements that can be done.
All right, so for our process improvement recommendations, we bucketed them in 4 categories. One being a redesign of PCC, so this would be adding functionality to PCC or changing how the providers and MAs are actually using PCC. Some EMR quick fixes is our second category. Patient portal usage is a big part of our analysis, moving things out of the process in order to save time, and then finally general office flow process improvements. But before we get into some of those, first we wanted to look at the provider to MA ratio at KPP. So upon starting our observations, we heard from a lot of the MAs especially, they felt that they were understaffed and that it was slowing them down just because they didn't have enough MAs. So we wanted to see if we could actually put this into numbers and see if there was actually data to support this. On a literature review, Zach found an article that pointed out this formula here. It shows the medical assistant workload divided by the number of medical assistants should equal the provider workload divided by the number of providers. And this will allow you to have balance so that the workloads between the MAs and the providers will be equal and the process will be balanced. So taking into account this formula into how KPP actually operates, so we looked at both sick visits and well visits, and then used the proportions of sick visits and well visits and how often those kind of appointments happen in order to get an actual ratio, which came out to be 1.09 MAs for every provider. And we're actually seeing that this number lines up with the business model that KPP has, as the number of MAs is actually higher than this because you guys use a floating MA currently, so there's one more MA than provider, which brings this number even higher than 1.09 MAs per provider. And we think that this fits in well just because the bottleneck of the process is providers, so by having extra MAs around, we can make sure that their utilization rate is low enough that providers always have work to do. So moving into some of our more specific short-term recommendations. One is pharmacy module calculator and possibly training for it, and then also the vaccine calendar. So the pharmacy module dosage calculator is one idea that we've had because dosages are often manually calculated when providers or MAs are looking to prescribe vaccines or medications. There are times when they actually have to pull out their phones or go online to pull out a calculator and calculate the dosage that is appropriate for that patient. And if they happen to not get this number correct, this leads to calls from the pharmacy in order to make sure that the dosages were correct. We think that this is either somewhere we can build something into PCC in order to eliminate this problem, or if it is already an option within PCC, it is a good training opportunity for providers and MAs to use. So by building an intuitive calculator into the EHR, there would be that cut down manual time calculating the dosages, so this would save us time and increase throughput in the process. We'd also be able to catch errors in prescribing dosages upstream before they actually go to the pharmacy, so this would also save time. And then also by catching these upstream, we would possibly see a quality improvement aspect as well. So looking at the impact of this recommendation, we will see that this particular recommendation only applies to providers sick visits, and we'll see a throughput increase from somewhere between 0.08 more patients per hour for every single provider to 0.24 more patients per hour for every single provider. This slide here will be something to see throughout the presentation, and it just shows which kinds of appointments this specific recommendation will impact. So for example, the pharmacy module calculator savings will impact sick visits, vaccine-only visits, and other visits that have a prescription or vaccine in them. And then the number you see to the right is the total system impact per provider per hour. So the total system impact here is 0.03 to 0.08. More patients will be seen per hour per provider throughout the entire system. So moving on to our next recommendation is the vaccine calendar calculations. Many times MAs are looking at the vaccine calendar and it will specifically say, for example, it will say 36 weeks out from this specific date, this vaccine will be given. Obviously, it's hard to calculate in your mind what specific date that lines up with and if the person is actually due for a vaccine. So they have to go online to a time and date calculator, plug in the specific date plus 36 weeks, and this will give them the date that they actually need. So we think that this is something that could be built in easily into PCC, or if that functionality is already there, it's another training opportunity in order to streamline the process. Provider well visits, this impacts provider well visits, so throughput increase will be somewhere between 0.03 more patients per hour to 0.07 more patients per hour. And we see that it impacts well visits with vaccinations and those vaccine-only visits that were in our data set, and the total system impact will be 0.01 to 0.03 more patients per hour throughout the entire system. So now we're going to move over to Vic, and he's going to talk about some process redesign and technology intervention.
So after understanding the recommendations which related to more of what PCC can help with, we now sort of delve deeper into the process redesign and technology-related interventions. We have broadly bucketed them into three sort of categories. One being streamlining the questionnaire design, which often relates to removing the redundancy in the EMRs, in the questions that are present there. The second being the anticipatory wellness e-guidance, which relates to potential time savings in terms of offloading, a lot of clinical tasks to sort of electronic sources, and largely this is a small but significant one, which is placing rectal thermometers in every room. And now we'll touch upon each of them. So for the first one, the diet and behavioral questions, we are looking at standardization as the first kind of a bucket. Yeah. So in terms of standardization, we're trying to understand who asked the question, whether it's the provider or the MA, and how this essentially aligns. And the second being streamlining the way the questions and the questionnaire is being streamlining the way the questions are being framed. So which is essentially once you're handing out a questionnaire to the patients, and once they respond to it, the MAs can essentially ascertain whether it's typical or atypical diet, nutrition, behavior, and this essentially saves in time in clinical diagnosis. And also, we also look at patient portals and forms as another way wherein we can incorporate certain time savings with respect to your incorporation. So for diet and behavioral questions, if we go on to all of these recommendations, for MA well visits, we found that there's a throughput increase of 0.07 to 0.14 patients per hour. So, and like this is just to conclude, this is because all of these recommendations related to diet and behavioral questions are only related to the well visits. This will lead to a systemic throughput increase of 0.03 to 0.08 more patients per hour per provider. So what we have done is essentially benchmark your practices and benchmark whatever you are sort of putting onto your websites and all of the services that you are providing to your patients with a couple of other sort of significantly and highly rated quality pediatric care practices. So we found, and this is like a pan-US thing that we conducted. So we compared your practices to Rainbow Pediatric Clinics in Jacksonville, Florida, Children's Medical Group in Hudson Valley, New York, and Hyde Park, which is an NCQA accredited and highly rated primary care chain in Boston. And our idea is that even as a part of your presentation packet, you will find an Excel sheet which will sort of just combine all of the recommendations that we've had. And the idea behind this is just to validate all of the recommendations that we had for you, because they have already been put into practice by certain other sort of primary care clinics. So interestingly, we found that there's a TADIS link, which TADIS tool, which links online questionnaire responses to the EMR, which help prepare the patient prepare for a patient visit. So it essentially delivers questionnaires to parents and teams and collects the answers from them. And this actually is a pretty interesting tool because especially for adolescents, as Adarin and Priya pointed out, that there was in terms of compliance rates, adolescents were falling down. So this provides a secure messaging service for them, and this actually leads to customer retention and customer satisfaction, especially when adolescent age comes. So going on to the next slide. So this was particularly interesting because Window Pediatrics, what it says, and this is something we picked from their website. So for every scheduled well visit, they prepare 1 week in advance. So they review past records. They can review your TADIS report questionnaires and other documents to make sure that your charts are up to date. So this is particularly interesting because the front office team or the front office staff, they will keep reviewing your schedules, and they will work to essentially not only take care of the insurance part, but also that your templates are pre-populated in a way which helps save time in the actual well visit or the sick visit. This is just going off of it. So we just highlighted this particular line. So if a patient is calling in for a sick visit and has like multiple concerns or complex problems, this is a problem that you have often cited to us, that a lot of sick visit symptoms are presented in the well visits. So they request their patients that you call in ahead and tell us if there are certain more conditions, and so that they can be more prepared. And if there is something, they can essentially just tell you to fill in a self-assessment questionnaire or symptoms letter. So that's a good model that we found. So for diet and behavioral questions, what we thought could, as from a recommendation from our side, was they can be converted into a pre-visit form, and it can be put on the website. And a lot of hospitals have already been doing this. So if you look at this particular area on the questionnaire, so it says like current diet, snacks, food codes, and like we had similar redundant questions even as a part of the current EMR. So if this kind of form, if it is sent to a patient and if it is uploaded on the website, or he brings it to the clinic by himself or herself, so what the MA can do is essentially just make an assessment whether the diet or the behavior is typical or atypical, and then just that is the only information which is anyways relevant for effective clinical diagnosis. So for the second category, being the anticipatory wellness e-guidance, there are multiple formats in which this guidance can be provided. One way is like listing all of these nutrition sources on your website. So we checked on the KPP's website, while you do have age-specific recommendations, but this is one thing that we found for like patient and parent education. They have like an empanelment of all the relevant links, which is not present as of now on your website. Coming to the second one, for ADHD forms, they actually request patients to log into the TADIS portal, and they to complete the self-evaluation, which will eventually save them time not completing these forms while they are in the clinic. So, and even for sports physicals, they will essentially ask you to print the sports physical history form and complete it and bring it to your appointment, rather than spending time filling it out there. So these are interesting observations that other things are incorporating. Another interesting thing that we found was, Dr. Bull and Dr. Wolf had said that there are sometimes, even on the patient portal, we've seen a lot of questions which may be very trivial, but patients keep on asking them. So after you give them, the basic dose of the diagnosis, a lot of these trivial questions you can just recommend certain AAP accredited apps. Like this is just an example, Text for Baby. So very questions. These are like you have sort of bots at the end, and they can just answer like questions and relate it to what the medical literature says. So it can just offload some of your sort of burden that you face. And for the next slide, so for all well child visit handles, Rainbow Pediatrics is also putting all of them onto their website month-wise, and this is all bright futures recommended, which and this is the same kind of questionnaires which are being handed out in person as well. So they can either fill in before or there, but it's suggested that they fill in before. This is just one slide. This is AAP recommended apps for parents and for providers. So if you just look at Bright Futures, I'm just giving one example here. So there's an option where you can just recommend or suggest this is the kind of anticipatory guidance that you need to send the patient after the diagnosis. Now waiting on to the time assessments and the impact assessment. So all of these recommendations will essentially lead to a significant throughput increase for provider sick visits, which is then ranging 0.24 to 0.52 patients per hour, and also a good amount of throughput increase for well visits, which is 0.1 to 0.22 patients per hour. So just to conclude, the anticipatory well-being guidance is related to well visits and sick visits with certain nutritional issues or certain issues that come after the diagnosis, nutrition issues that come after the diagnosis of the patient, and 0.2 to 0.4 more patients per hour. And now Kyle will talk about the rectal thermometer.
Thanks, Vic. So the next improvement we're going to talk about is placing rectal thermometers in every room. This is a good example of a process improvement that, while it doesn't have the big impact like what Vic was just talking about, putting in patient portal kind of stuff, things like that, it does illustrate that even the smallest things can actually drive up the throughput and increase the number of patients that we're seeing. So our idea was placing rectal thermometers in every room is something that will help the MAs because they oftentimes have to go and grab a rectal thermometer before an appointment begins. They have to go put one away, or they forget to get it entirely and go start rooming the patient and realize that they have to go back and grab one. So up here we can see the time impact that placing rectal thermometers in every room would have. Our estimate is that it would be for MA sick visits between 0.03 and 0.05 more patients through throughput increase, and then for well visits 0.02 to 0.03 throughput increase. So looking at this in the total system effect, so it would only apply to those patients young enough that they need to use a rectal thermometer, and these would apply to both well visits and sick visits. The total system throughput increase would be between 0.013 and 0.029, which seems very small. This next slide illustrates the impact that even a throughput increase that small can have. If you look at the cost of these thermometers, if you have to buy about 15 to fill the rooms that currently don't have rectal thermometers, even if they are $300 per rectal thermometer, that cost comes out to $4,500, and those are including the most expensive rectal thermometers that we could actually find. With this recommendation, the throughput increase would allow us to see 6.5 to 14.5 more patients per week, and we saw that overall the total profit you'll make from seeing these patients is about $968 per patient. So a conservative estimate, taking into account the least amount of patients with the highest cost, you'll still see that it will only take 5 weeks to actually make up this cost of buying rectal thermometers and placing them in every single room. So next we're going to move into some of our more intermediate recommendations. By that.
All right, so that was all things that we believe can be accomplished in the short term, and I'm going to be talking more about intermediate recommendations. These all involve working with PCC in order to improve the EHR and make it more usable and intuitive for MAs and providers. So we have 3 different intermediate recommendations. The first is patient portal implementation. Vic went into detail about different practices that use the patient portal for sick visits. I'm going to be talking more about the well visit side of that and how to use for well visits, and then a little bit for sick visits. EHR tool redesign and inventory update. This affects mostly flu shots and just will allow for MAs and providers to select drugs and vaccines faster, and then long-term and short-term impact of drugs so that there isn't irrelevant medical history within someone's chart. And so getting into the patient portal incorporation, this is a screenshot from Brentwood Pediatrics in St. Louis, Missouri. And they use the portal during well visits. And so they have the patients input their medical history, social history, behavioral history stuff in before the visit even starts, so that they're able to save that time, and the MAs don't have to ask. Don't have to ask those questions during the actual visit. And they also have something they call a symptom checker, which allows for parents to put symptoms into this tool, and it tells them whether or not they should go see a doctor, or if they should bring it up at a appointment if they have one. And another example of the patient portal being used is at Rainbow Pediatrics. Vic mentioned this as one of the clinics that has high quality care. And so what they use the patient portal for a wide variety of things. And what we are focusing on is updating demographic information. You can send health reminders to people, send educational materials if that is that would have to do with nutrition and physical activity counseling, and that would be a way to fulfill that quality metric as well. And that can all be done outside of the office, so it saves time in the visit. And this would save time for MA well visits. It would save a conservative estimate would be 0.14 patients per hour in throughput increase, and an ideal state would be a throughput increase of 0.48 patients per hour for MA well visits, and this would result in a total system increase of 0.08 to 0.2 more patients per hour per provider. And then the next part is the recommendation that would have an impact on a very small percentage of APP visits, but it is the excess drug options in the drop-down menus. This mostly happens with flu shots, but seeing that it is flu season, and like I was talking about earlier, that is when most of the visits happen in October, November, December. Being able to get patients in and out of flu clinics, enter the flu vaccines into the EHR faster would help increase throughput even by a little bit. So for provider sick visits, this would allow a range from 0.02 to 0.04 patients per hour, and for provider well visits, it would allow a throughput increase of 0.01 to 0.02. And this would affect well visits as well as sick visits with a prescription or vaccination, and it would allow for a total system increase of 0.02 to 0.05 more patients per hour for each provider. And getting into the relevance of clinical history, we've noticed, in our observations and in talking with MAs and providers that drugs and medical histories don't always pop up in an effective format, and the list that is in the medical history is often long and sometimes contains prescriptions or conditions that aren't relevant anymore. And in an ideal state, certain medications wouldn't be present anymore after they've been prescribed one time. They would have a short-term impact on the patient. For example, if someone's prescribed amoxicillin, that shouldn't show up in the EHR 5 years later because it's not a drug that they are still taking. And so we have estimated that for provider sick visits, it would allow for a throughput increase of 0.02 to 0.04, and for provider well visits, it would allow a throughput increase of 0.01 to 0.02 patients per hour. And this would affect well visits and sick visits for providers, and would lead to an overall system increase of 0.02 to 0.06 more patients per hour. And now Kyle is going to get into another recommendation that deals with sibling and family history.
So, our idea for a recommendation for linked sibling and family histories looks at, for example, the obvious case that two siblings come into an appointment, and an MA has to take down the family and social history for each of those siblings separately. This is the obvious case, and if we were able to integrate the siblings in the EHR together, along with these family and social histories, we could have a real-time updated status for their family histories. So that A and MA in a situation like this wouldn't have to go in and fill out both of the patient's family histories, but also for different times when only one of the siblings was coming in. If there had been a change in the other sibling's family history, that would be reflected in the EHR, and the MA wouldn't have to go and fill that all back out. They could just confirm it with the parent. So here you can see that's kind of just this difference between the current state and ideal state and the time that you would save by linking these two aspects together. So this would apply on the MA side for well visits, and we would see a throughput increase between 0.07 patients per hour to 0.48 patients per hour. So as you can see, we're pretty unsure about the time that this would actually save, but we think it would be somewhat significant because family history does usually take a long time for well visits to fill out. This only applies to well visits, as I said, and the total system impact of focusing on this would be between just 0.04 to 0.2 more patients per hour per provider. I'm going to pass it back off to Priya, and she's going to talk about process redesign and technology improvement.
All right, so this is about the process redesign and technology interventions, and it links back to the appointment compliance as well. It's a way for PPP to possibly increase the amount of adolescent and older child visits that they have. So the first one that we mentioned was the monetary or other incentives. This is things like gift cards or free movie tickets that could be given to patients to motivate them to come to their well health visits. This has actually worked in the neighborhood health plan of Rhode Island and the community health network of Connecticut, where they saw a 12% and 40% increase in their amount of well visits. The next one would be the conversion of physical visits and acute visits to well visits. And this would make it so that when children came in for their sick visits, they could have well visit procedures done on them so that KPP could increase the reimbursement of their well visit measures. The next thing would be automated reminders. This is a very popular one that has been popping up in a lot of different practices where patients are texted or emailed that they have an appointment coming up or that they need to be scheduling their appointment. This, in conjunction with the social media peer networks, has seen an increase of about 9% in California, where they did both of these so that there was a more solidified team network, because at least 90% of children ages 13 to 17 are on social media, so this is a huge way of getting to them to see that they need to be more engaged in their health. And now I'll go more into the long-term recommendations. The long-term recommendations have mostly in part been identified as long-term due to the extensive amount of work that will have to be done on the EHR. So the first one would be to redesign the EHR to enable checkboxes and auto-population more extensively so that providers aren't spending as much time checking those boxes or going through and making sure that the information is auto-populated in the free context. The next thing we would like to cover would be the decision support system to help prioritize patients. This would make it so that providers won't waste any time on deciding which patients they need to go see and doing the calculations to see which one would be the most efficient. All of that time would be eliminated. So, along with that, we would like to reduce the amount of scrolling and template revision that is currently going on. At the moment, there is a different level of specificity between templates. There are some templates that are highly specific, and then there are those that aren't very specific at all, and that causes problems when providers have to enter a lot of information in that is very common to that type of sickness or visit. So finding the balance between having something that's too specific and having something that's too free-form for providers is the end goal of template revision. We would also like to fix some of the organizational problems with templates, and that goes along with having it so that if an MA were to pick up a template and the provider that follows doesn't want that template or wants a different one, they should be able to switch between the templates and have everything populate in a way that's intuitive to the provider so that they're not searching for information. The next thing would be free-form medical documentation versus decision documentation, decision being checkboxes for the provider. Having the appropriate type of medical documentation at different points in the EHR will make it so that providers are more easily able to check boxes if it's something that's really quick and easy, or add free-form if it's something that needs documentation so that they can either give it to another provider or have more information later on in the patient's medical care. And finally, all of these will result in the synchronizing of provider goals with the PCC layout, meaning that the visit will follow the PCC layout and the EHR will have a more intuitive fit for the provider. And so by doing this, it will reduce the time and increase the throughput. For the provider visits, for the provider sick visits, it'll increase the throughput from 0.04 to 0.08 patients per hour. And for the well visits, it will go from 0.02 to 0.03. But on the MA side, this will increase the throughput from 0.04 to 0.08, and for sick visits, and increase the throughput for well visits from 0.02 to 0.05. And now, and for total process system impact of 0.04 to 0.07 more patients per hour for MAs, and 0.03 to 0.06 more patients per hour for providers. The next thing that we would like to also implement wasn't exactly quantifiable, but we feel would have an effect on the throughput would be patient familiarity, where providers see patients, the same patients, from time to time, so that the provider is more familiar with the patient's case and can go through the visit more efficiently. And now I'd like to pass it off to Kyle for the overall workload.
All right, so now we're just going to look at the impact of all these recommendations and what actually happens to the process. So if we look at just our short-term recommendations, we'll see these numbers for the MA. For well visits, their total workload time will drop from about 21 minutes to a little bit under 18, while for sick visits, it drops from almost 16 to a little bit over 14. For the providers, we see a little bit bigger change from 24 minutes to a little bit over 22 for well visits, while for sick visits, it's a little over 16 down to 14. And now we're looking at if we combine all of our recommendations together, except for those few that we found were not quantifiable, such as the decision support system and the patient familiarity piece. We'll see that the well visit time for an MA drops from the workload being at 21 minutes to around 16 minutes, and their sick visit time from just under 16 down to about 13 minutes. And finally, for providers, which were the bottleneck in the process, so we were looking to make the most impact here, we will see over 25 minutes for well visits will be the workload, and now we're going to drop that to just under 20. While for sick visits, they were seeing about a little over 16 minutes, and we're dropping that to a little bit over 13. So you can see these are kind of those total numbers for the impact and how much time it would actually take off. Looking at the throughput increases, we see for MAs, their throughput goes up by 19.6%, while for providers it goes up by 18.4%. As we found, the providers are the bottleneck in the process. So we would expect that the total system for MAs and providers, the number of patients that you can see per day, would actually go up about 18.4%. So now Andrew's going to take those time savings numbers that I talked about and actually run them through the simulation to show the results there as well.
So with the with the recommendations, we have both short-term and all recommendations, which is short-term, intermediate, and long-term recommendations put together. So for the short-term recommendations, because we have a conservative estimate and an ideal estimate, we don't really know the exact impact that the recommendations will have. And so if you look for the sick value added time, the conservative estimate, which the value added time is the time the patient spends with the provider and the MA. And so for the conservative estimate, it's around 25.98 minutes. For the well, it's 34.56 minutes. And the average wait time for sick is 31.67 minutes, and well average wait time is 25.29. And so the total time for a sick visit is around 57.65 minutes, and well total time is around 59.85 minutes. And that is when we run it with using our normal schedule, where they're scheduled back to back. The sick appointments are 10 minutes long, and the well appointments are 20 minutes long. And then for the ideal estimate, the sick value added time decreases a little, as well as the well value added time, and the sick average, that little decrease does cause the sick average wait time to decrease by a bit to 27.8 minutes, and the well average wait time to decrease to 28.89 minutes. And then we also ran this, the numbers using the ideal schedule, where the sick is around 15 minutes long and the well is 20 minutes long, because after implementing these short-term recommendations, because the recommendation impact isn't that high, the sick visit for provider activity ends up being around 15 minutes long, and for well is around 20 minutes long as well. And as you can tell by inputting those, the sick average wait time decreases a lot. For the conservative and the ideal estimate down to around 12 minutes, and for well average wait time, the conservative estimate decreases to 13 minutes, and for the ideal estimate, it goes down to 7 minutes. So for all recommendations, and we added everything in, and we ran it using the normal schedule, the conservative estimate, the sick value added time goes down to around 23 minutes, and the well value added time is around 31 minutes. The average wait time for well and sick are 19 and 22, and so the sick total time is around 42.83 minutes, and the well total time is around 53.57 minutes. Similarly, with the ideal estimate, it's around 21.99 minutes. The well value added time is around 28.02, and the sick average wait time is around 14.67, and the well average wait time is around 17.88. And we also ran this using the ideal schedule, and we implemented all of the recommendations. This will decrease the sick visit to 14 minutes and the well visit to 18 minutes. And so instead of having it 10 and 20 apart, we have it 14 and 18 apart. And as you can tell, that decreases the sick wait time to 16.77 for the conservative estimate, and the well average wait time goes down to 11.25. And that decreases the overall sick total time and well total time as well. And for the ideal estimate, the ideal estimate as well. Yes, the sick visit decreases to 13 minutes, and the well visit decreases to 17 minutes. And so we have a 13 and 17 minute scheduling intervals, and that decreases the sick average wait time to 12.42, and decreases the well average wait time to 13.05. And then we have the queue times for MA and provider, and as you can tell with the ideal estimate, the wait time and the queue number in the queue decreases. And then again, we looked at the start time and the scheduled end time. So for the simulation, if we ran it according to the normal schedule, you end around 5:06 03, but the scheduled end time is 3:50, so there's still around like an hour difference. If you use the ideal schedule, though, there's only like a 15-minute difference, and you end around like 30 minutes later. And you can see that across all the other schedules as well. It's usually the difference is around like 30 to 40 minutes between the normal schedule and the ideal schedule. Do you have any questions? The end.